Hello everyone, this is your lecturer Hajirah Farooq, and today I will be discussing the lecture summary videos of the lecture number 5 and 6 for cohort 10, semester 2 operations management module. So starting off with the week 5's lecture, we discussed the chapter 7, capacity planning and management, in the 5th week of the semester. The learning outcomes that will be covered in this lecture will be the learning outcome 2, which is to demonstrate an understanding of the product and process design and its connection between with operations management performance indicators, and the learning outcome number 3, which is to explain and apply planning and control techniques for the operations management function. So the learning objectives of this chapter are to define and measure capacity and appreciate the factors that influence it, to assess the difficulties of matching capacity to demand, to evaluate and apply strategies for matching capacity with demand in the short, medium, and long term, to analyze the impact of constraints and bottlenecks on a process and consider the theory of constraints, outline different strategies available for both manufacturing and service operations, and lastly, to explain and apply key forecasting techniques and understand the circumstances when they are appropriate. The key theories that we will be discussing are the resource mix, which is the collection of inputs or resources into a process that can be adjusted to increase or decrease capacity. Input and output measures of capacity. It is possible to measure the capacity of an operation by analyzing either inputs or outputs. Either method is correct. The selection of the method depends on which measure is more logical. Then another theory that is very important is the design capacity, which is the top level and desired ideal state capacity, as it presumes 24/7 operations with no stoppages. Then effective capacity, which is the same as design capacity, but it subtracts all the stoppages such as lunch breaks and maintenance. Then actual capacity, which is more of a working number. It looks at what is actually produced and considers both planned and unplanned stoppages. And then lastly, the theory of constraints. So starting off with the introduction, capacity is the ability to deliver goods and services. The demand for goods and services are determined by the market. There are three main factors to be considered when capacity planning for goods and services. The capacity, which is how much can or should an operation make. The demand, that how much does the market require of that product or service. And then forecasting, that how to match the demand to capacity without wasting any resources. So the capacity management affects all areas of an operation. Capacity determines the rate at which the operation can transform inputs into outputs and the quantity of products or service that can be delivered within a given time period. Capacity decisions determine the number of, for example, passengers in the flight on an aeroplane, patients who can be seen in a surgery at a doctor's practice, or maybe mobile phones that can be produced in a week by a factory. So capacity management also has some adjustments, like capacity is usually measured in convenient units such as bus carrying 53 passengers, or you can say a fast food restaurant with 600 seats, a warehouse with 10,000 meter cube of storage space. And capacity can also be altered, for example, by introducing new approaches and materials, or by increasing service providers or machines, or by acquiring additional facilities. Altering capacity can be difficult and time consuming, and it can also incur costs. Then there are some constraints of the capacity management as well, which is like restrictions on the running of an operation with respect to available resources of any kind. Capacity is always constrained by the slowest or the smallest capacity task in the process. Then we also discuss the resource mix, which is made up of staff, technology, materials availability, products or service mix, storage, and working schedules. So yeah, then we moved on to discuss the capacity management theory of constraints. And then we moved on to discuss the input units or output units that can be measured. Then we discussed some of the capacity planning strategies, including capacity lead demand strategies, capacity matches demand strategies, and capacity lags demand strategies. And then we discussed the capacity planning timings. So for example, short-term planning, medium-term planning, and long-term planning. Then we discussed the anticipating changes in demand. And then, for example, taste changes, competitors, seasonality or cyclical products, economic changes, government policy changes, complementary products or services, and substitutes. Then we discuss forecasting, which is the prediction of future demand based on qualitative and quantitative measures. And then we moved on to the qualitative methods of the forecasting, including the Delphi method, and then the quantitative method, which includes the time series analysis, which includes the trend, seasonal demand, cyclical demand, and random variation. So then these little graphs were discussed for the quantitative methods, which are a part of the time series analysis, patterns of demand, and then the capacity strategies for operational delivery were discussed. Capacity strategies for operational delivery include the level production, and then the chase demand is also included in it. The demand management is also, of course, included. And then we discussed about the contemporary thinking, which is yield management, which is a group of methods that assist in an operation with fixed capacity to maximize its operational revenue and utility. Then we discussed the queuing theory that works on the basis that where the flow of consumers into a process is not regular, then there will be an element of waiting involved, where customers will have to queue. And then this was a little diagram that we discussed. And moving on, we discussed the customer's perception of waiting in queues, and that was it about the the lecture number 5. Moving on to the lecture 6, we discussed the topic of supply chain and supply chain relationship management. The learning objectives for this chapter include describing the management of supply chains, assess purchasing strategies for different types of items, identify key issues in managing supplier by relationships, identify key issues of the third-party logistics, the TPL, identify postponement strategies in supply chains, and compare different strategies for supply chain efficiency and responsiveness. So what is supply chain? We discuss the supply chain management, or also known as SCM, is the management of activities, organizations, and processes involving all stakeholders from the end customer downstream to the supplier that produces the raw material upstream. In order for the goods and services to reach the customers, the various processes have to be integrated. Then we discussed the Kraljick's tactical procurement diagram. And then we discussed about the routine efficient process, that when purchasing items have low profit and low supply risk, the procurement tactics should imply competition among a competitor to reduce transaction and unit costs. For example, lost cost commodities such as nuts and bolts, office stationery, low skilled temporary labor for construction sites, etc. Then we discussed about bottleneck, reliable process. So when purchasing items have low profit and high supply risk, suppliers have higher buying power. For example, processing chips and for computers or fuel deliveries to petrol stations. To ensure constant availability, a long-term service contract should be established between the buyer and the seller. Then we discussed about the leverage cost-effective process, that when purchasing items have high profit and low supply risk, it requires, so this is when it's used, it requires one to closely work with the supplier to ensure product specifications are met at a reasonable cost. For example, the car seat for car manufacturers and logistic providers for internet-based retailers. Then we discussed about the critical cooperative process. The critical items have both high profit impact and cost. Organizations often rely on single source suppliers to ensure continued delivery of products and services. For example, plane manufacturers or IT support for banks. There's higher switching costs for companies if they switch the suppliers under this theory. And the emphasis is on long-term collaboration and mutual dependence rather than short-term cost minimization. Then we went on to do a little class activity, and then we discussed the nature of relationship between supplier and manufacturer. And then we discussed the arm's length relationship versus strategic partnership via this diagram. You can have a look at this diagram by logging into your Moodle and downloading the week 6 chapter slides. Then we discussed about the partnership life cycle effect, and then we discussed the supplier involvement points in the NPD or new product design. Then we discuss some of the challenges in managing supplier relationships. Some of the factors have a negative impact on the success of supplier relationships. These factors can be the changes in the supply base due to short-term cost-oriented criteria rather than long-term value creation. It can be late and insufficient involvement of suppliers in the development process, and it can also be lack of open communication and information sharing. Then we discuss some of the strategies for improving supplier relationships. For example, making long-term commitments to suppliers early on with guaranteed return business for suppliers over a product's lifetime. Or maybe to assume the role of a leader and coordinator within interfirm R&D projects, or maybe to balance an external and internal know-how, as success is based on the effective exchange of technical information and the social interfaces between the members, and so on. Then we discuss the product design and supply chain strategies. For example, the postponement strategies and speculation strategies. So the postponement strategies is when the timing of crucial activities is delayed, by which end products assume their customer-specific functionalities, features, and identities. For example, ice cream trucks have vanilla ice cream as product base, and they delay the formation of the actual product, which is the ice cream with chocolate, strawberry, and banana toppings, to save cost and time and storage. They prepare the end product as per the requirement of the customers. This is known as the postponement strategy. Then the full speculation strategy is when the companies use this strategy by holding goods in their stock and then dispatch to the local warehouse according to the amount of local demand forecast. This strategy saves time and decentralized the supply chain procedure, which increases efficiency. Then we discuss the postponement and speculation matrix. And then we also discussed the diagram for the full speculation strategy. Then we discussed about manufacturing postponement, which is a strategy where the product retains its standard form in the manufacturing process for as long as possible. The differentiation is delayed until the customer order has been received. For example, the final packaging of mobile phones is carried out by TPL providers after receiving customer orders, who has the inventory of handsets, SIM cards, and accessories. Then we discussed the diagram of manufacturing postponement, and then we discussed about the logistics postponement, which is the full line of anticipated inventory is stored at a few strategic locations. The changes in inventory locations are delayed downstream sub-locations in the supply chain to the latest possible point. For example, Amazon has the key storage locations in England, including London, Birmingham, and Manchester. However, they send products downstream, for example, the crew, as per customer demand or order. Then we discussed the diagram for logistics postponement. And then we discussed about full postponement, which takes place when both manufacturing and logistics are postponed. For example, Bang & Olufsen, manufacturers of audiovisual systems, can test and deliver customized products directly to final customers in Europe within 5 days. And then we discussed the diagram for full postponement. Then we discussed about the reverse supply chain method, which starts from the end customer, then to the distributor, then distribution, then central return center, and then dispose management like recycle, resell, scrap, reuse, and recover. Then we discuss some of the tasks of reverse supply chain management, which includes product acquisition, reverse logistics, inspection and disposition, recondition, distribution, and sales. Then we did a little class activity about a question that what is the reverse supply chain strategy of Amazon? And that is it, your lecture summary for week 5 and week 6 lectures. I hope that it helped. If you need any more information, then you can always log on to your Moodle and download the live sessions, the chapter slides or the lecture slides for any of the weeks that you want it for. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that it helped, and see you in the next video.